Hello and welcome once again to The Invisible Hand. I'm your host, Tracy R. Twyman. Today's guest is an old friend and a very influential writer, Prince Nicholas devere von Drakenberg, author of the books The Dragon Seed and The Dragon Legacy. He refers to himself as the sovereign prince of an entity called Drakenberg, as well as the sovereign head of an organization called the Imperial and Royal Dragon Court. This is made up of people who claim descent from a collection of royal bloodlines related to devere's family. They all have titles recognized by the court as having standing in the sovereign kingdom of Drakenberg. Now, devere's work deals with several fascinating subjects, but today I decided to focus on this concept of Drakenberg, which I'll allow him to explain. One way of looking at it is that this is another freedom technology, somewhat like the sovereignty movement in the US, Canada, and Britain. In that movement, people who choose to, quote, go sovereign, file paperwork with the government announcing their freedom from the government's rule, thus proclaiming that their own individual sovereignty is supreme. We've talked about these ideas in previous editions of this podcast. This is a bit of a different twist on that because you're using the true traditions upon which sovereignty has historically been based, royal blood that denotes inherited rights to titles and land, to rest your own claim of sovereignty upon in the modern world. This is like talking to the elite on terms that they can understand, saying, don't mess with me because I'm a prince, not just another slave. The other aspect of Drakenberg that is important to understand is its inherently ethereal nature. While most states are merely corporations, imaginary entities brought to life by legal proclamation, Drakenberg is transcorporeal. It is both alive and dead, apparent and hidden, real and surreal at the same time. Because of this, it represents real power that cannot be overthrown, or at least that is the idea behind it. To understand the concepts dealt with in this interview regarding Saturn's invisible kingdom, the Golden Age, the Lord of Misrule, and the true meaning behind the anarchist symbol of the Liberty Cap, please read my essays Regnum in Potentia, Parts 1 and 2, as well as my new book, Money Grows on the Tree of Knowledge, available at libertycappress.com. Here's the interview. You have all these titles that are associated with your name. What do you consider yourself to be? What's your role in society or in the world?
My role in society, I believe, is rapidly emerging as a coordinator and a facilitator for other people, to raise money for charity, to establish teaching centres, refuges, and so on, and generally try and make some difference in what I consider to be mass insanity, and I think many other people do as well.
But, I mean, I'm saying, okay, you refer to yourself as a sovereign of some sort. You say you're the king of the dragons. What does that mean?
I don't say king.
Okay.
Prince of the Dragons is something that has slowly sort of been foisted on me in terms of responsibility for other people.
Is that a historical title, or what exactly does that mean?
Well, yes, the Dragon Princes, you'll find them universally.
It's not a single title that one person holds at each time. There's several of them.
Yeah, I would count amongst the Dragon Princes Alexander de Bathory, Prince Christophe de Sade, Anwar Agard, Arif Akhundzada of Pakistan. There is now an International Council of Princes which has been recently formed. We are also applying for Royal Academy in East Africa, and then more people will come on board. So yes, there are quite a few Dragon Princes about.
Now,
it's just I happen to be coordinating them.
So, from what I understand about reading your writings, you're saying that you and these other princes and your organization, the Dragon Court, you're sort of carrying on, I guess, the oldest traditions of royalty and kingship and sovereignty and things like that. You're saying that your ancestors were the original kings, the source of regality, and you're carrying on the same traditions. Is that accurate?
That's absolutely true, yes. We are possibly, the devere are possibly the oldest dynasty in Eurasia, or Western Eurasia. The name was first used in 400 BC by King Vir, who was what they call a brief or a custodian of the wisdom of the dragon. He established a kingdom in what was called Pictavia by the Scots, northern Pictavia, which is now Scotland. And they reigned there up until around about 740 AD, with the birth of Melesiana de Cid. She then carried the dragon tradition on in France, and Sigismund picked it up from there. King Sigismund founded his dragon court in Hungary, and several others in Serbia, Croatia, Romania, and so on. So, yes, we do carry that tradition, and the dragon princes are custodians of their own dynastic traditions. And I, overall, am custodian of all the traditions.
So, what is the significance of the dragon symbolism, symbolizing, I guess, the origin of this race and the source of the power that it represents? I remember you saying in your book that you can trace that back to the Sumerian figure of Tiamat, the original dragon goddess, who sort of represented the chaos out of which the universe was created.
Yeah.
What does it mean to you exactly?
The symbol of the dragon?
Yes. I mean, in connection to what you're doing.
Transcendent consciousness.
Okay.
The ability to clear the mind. Let's have a look at the word dragon. The word dragon comes from the Greek edrakon, which is what they call an aorist, or a verb that hasn't got a past, present, or future tense. It's just a verb, of the word dokesthai, which is a word which simply means to see clearly. Now, that means that the word dragon simply means one who sees clearly. And the idea of kingship, or the word, let's have a look at the word king. King means to see clearly, and dragon means to see clearly. So therefore, dragon king is a bit of a tautology, really, because dragon and king are the same thing, or dragon and prince, the first. So the symbol of the dragon for me represents, firstly, you have the serpentine quality of it, which has always been associated with healing and with the spinal column and the cerebral cortex and so on. Secondly, as a serpentine figure with wings, it shows that that healing power, or the healing of the mind, has transformed the individual, who now has a higher overview of life through clarity than perhaps other people do. And this is why they were chosen as kings, and this is why, through social engineering for millennia, it was hoped to ensure that that clarity of vision would become hereditary. That's what the symbol means to me. In
the stories of your ancestors, the oldest ones, the ones that I guess could be identified with the gods of the ancient world, it seems like, and I'm just generalizing a whole lot because we're talking about different figures from all sorts of different cultures throughout history, but in general we see the same themes in the myths surrounding these figures, that the original race that they came from, the original royal race, is something beyond what we consider to be human now, and that they came from some sort of other world, something that isn't the Earth that we know today, that they had some sort of transcendent quality to them that was non-earthly and non-human. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
We are doing research now, Mark Pinkham and I, into the origins of the Anunnaki way back nearly 40,000 years now, 10,000 years before the hybridization of humanity, to possibly Kashmir. And they seem to be linked very, very closely with the sons of Shiva, or the Jats, of whom the main king was Sanat Kumrai, who seems to be the first Grail king in human form, so to speak. The place that Shiva came to Earth, which is very much like the falling to Earth of Lucifer, was in what they now call Shangri-La. With this otherworldly situation, if you go way, way, way back, then you're talking about extraterrestrial life. then that can possibly be explained by the visitation of comets, which is now part of the seeding theory, which is quite popular. Mm-hmm. But for our people, we have always been associated with Shangri-La, the Elysian Fields, Arcadia, Tir Nog, Anwin, which is basically death or the other world. And all the ancient legends say that we appeared 450,000 years ago from another level of being or another level of consciousness that is coterminous and mutually occupational with this planet and with the consciousness that we generally perceive it with. So it's something on a different wavelength, if you like.
Now, is this the same concept as Drakenberg that you write about, and you I guess, consider yourself the sovereign of Drakenberg?
Yeah, very much so. The incorporeality of it is intended as a memorial to concepts like the Elysian Fields, like Arcadia, Tir Nog, and the other world.
Well, who came up with that? Who came up with that term? What's the historical origin of Drakenberg? I know there's Drakensberg Mountains in Africa, but where specifically did Drakenberg originate from?
It's a Germano-Hungarian name. I've got a cousin, Ellen, over in Holland, from the House of Holland, and she isn't a von Drakenberg, she's a van Drakenberg from the Hungarian side.
What's an example of someone using it in the same way you're using it, or are you the one who originated using it in that way?
I'm the one that originated using it in that way, but I was given it by one of the houses of Austria as what you might call a titular nominative or a name title, based on an extinct land price within their realm of authority. But as nothing in this life happens by coincidence, Drakenberg very, very quickly became associated with the union of opposites, if you wish, or with the concept of alchemy and so on, as it has gone on and as people have perceived it and written about it or contacted me about it. So it has this very otherworldly theme to it, because if you think of the Berg and the Draken as the male and the female put together, very much like in the symbol of Levy's Baphomet, then you have the negation of both the male and the female, the being and the doing, and that leaves you with the transcendent consciousness that allows you to perceive life as it really is. And that life is Kether in Malkuth, heaven on earth. It's, again, Tir Nog or Anwin or Arcadia or whatever. It's Eden, the perfected state of consciousness. Mm-hmm. So that's basically what Drakenberg stands for. And any regulation as a libertarian group comes from personal conscience having been transformed. So that's essentially what it means. And that's essentially what it stands for: transformed consciousness and social conscience and awareness based on that transformation.
Now, I recently wrote an article that I shared with you, and I thought actually it was only after writing it that I realized, this is the same thing as Drakenberg, or it's the same concept. I was writing about the idea of Saturn's kingdom, or the kingdom of Kronos, who, just for the audience's sake, supposedly Saturn was the king of this old world, and was dethroned by Zeus, who's equivalent to the Jehovah, the god of the current epoch. Yep. And he was sort of imprisoned in the other world, but he made his kingdom in his prison. So it sort of still exists. It always has existed and always will exist in the center of the earth. And according to the legends, people can still go there, especially, people who have been called to do so.
Yeah.
He rules there as sort of the Lord of Misrule. That's what they describe him as. And that during his epoch, when he ruled on Earth, that was the Golden Age, when supposedly he didn't really rule. He didn't have to tell people what to do, because there was no need to work, and there was no money, and there was no property, and everyone held everything in common. It was sort of this realm of peaceful anarchy. And so I thought that was interesting, because you're saying that now you want to take the concept of Drakenberg, and use it, I guess, and I'll let you explain, in a modern context to actually form a new sovereign state based on the concept of Drakenberg. Go ahead.
Yes, a libertarian state where behavior is a matter of education before liberation, if you wish. But that magnificent essay of yours, Tracy, it kind of encapsulated it. We have Kronos, the father of the Titans, who's Anu, in a sense, Anu. And the actual Titans, the word in Greek means the white ones, and so does elf. It means the white, or elves, it means the white ones. So we have this kind of crossover. But the concept of, like in Tiamat, chaos, or the concept of misrule, is something that must have been perceived by society that was hidebound in regulation, in authority, in conformity, and so on. And to see that possibly people can potter about quite happily without all that regulatory nonsense, that they can actually be able to see what is right and have what is right burnt into their hearts, as I think Jesus said. That is the kingdom of God. That's the kingdom of heaven. It is the ideal. And that, I think, is what we are about. We are trying, through science, through education, and not through silly mumbo-jumbo or New Age occultism, but through proper scientific research and education, we are trying to offer that capability once more.
Well, I remember, I think the original intent of the Declaration of Independence here in the United States, or it wasn't even called that back then, but the idea was that they were going to separate from the sovereignty of the British monarch and essentially institute a government of sovereigns here where every man was a sovereign. Now, that didn't work out. They didn't end up doing that, really. They changed the understanding of the law pretty quickly. But
do you remember a couple of weeks ago I asked if anyone could dig out Lysander Spooner? And Brian did a brilliant job of it. And Spooner said that anything like a constitution or a Declaration of Independence, it must be signed up for by each generation, not expecting the generation that established it to continue those laws on for decades or centuries and make other people conform to any Declaration of Independence. Spooner said that it is generationally consensual, and each generation has to be able to say yes or no, because otherwise democracy is not democracy at all. It's just totalitarianism.
Otherwise you have the assumption that someone else owns you, basically.
Absolutely.
If someone were to join Drakenberg, if you were able to, as you're planning on doing, get recognition from the United Nations, and create some sort of sovereign state, even if you don't actually have physical land, create some realm in which people can join up. Would it be really that concept of everyone within this state is a sovereign? Because I know that people who join the Dragon Court, for the most part, they get titles, royal titles that are assigned to them or that they choose. And is that a way of basically declaring your own sovereignty?
No, we haven't given titles out. I gave one out to Charles Johnson, and that title was Maréchal, which basically means marshal or protector. Each of these titles, if you look back into the Latin, they're job descriptions. We don't give title. If somebody has royal blood and they have a grasp of the concept of sovereignty and liberty, then we recognise their right to the title. We don't give it.
Okay.
Yes. You see, the concept of sovereignty has been mucked about so badly that now it just means some idiot in some office rules a piece of real estate. Doesn't mean much more than that, and with that goes various rights internationally. But for us as dragons, sovereignty is the concept of personal liberty, personal liberation from the confining mores, attitudes, concepts and so on that are imposed upon people in their daily lives, which is why we have become members of the European Commission's Register of Representatives, which is why we're going to the United Nations, and which is why we are seeking to ratify an implied sovereign status which was given over 13 years ago. The reason for that is because with sovereign and diplomatic status, there is a psychological condition within the individual that they are free to follow their conscience. And if they have diplomatic status, which is intended, then they are free of those restrictions and institutions which seem to bind their minds and their daily lives up at the present moment. So that is the concept of Drakenberg as a diplomatic and sovereign nation state, is one of real liberty. You know, we have, anarchists or libertarians pottering around saying, nobody is above me, I'm my own God. Yeah, right. Until the coppers come along and nick you for something.
Right.
I mean, it's an illusion. But if you go the whole hog and you really fight for recognition as a sovereign nation of blood, and you fight for diplomatic status, and you give that sovereignty back to your family, you know, the Dragon Court, then in reality, politically and psychologically speaking, they are free. And that can only lead on to spiritual freedom, because you cannot separate spiritual from material, and you cannot separate spiritual from religious or political or social activity or physical activity. Everything is one thing. So if you knock one of the blocks out from this restrictive prison, mental prison, then the rest of it will collapse as well.
So the kingdom of Drakenberg exists already, the freedom and the sovereignty of it exists already, and to get international recognition of its existence would be merely to discard mental blocks that people might have about the actuality of this concept, and to bring it more into physical reality. But it already exists, whether or not that ever happens.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're not going to do jumping up and down outside embassies or high commissions. We're going to do it in the tried and tested lady and gentlemanly fashion of negotiation and smiling. Because if you start bashing on somebody's door, they'll just bash on you. It just doesn't work that. You know, this is where a lot of protesters go wrong. They go, like last week in London, 250,000 people turned up to protest cuts in government spending, and it was a peaceful protest except for a few anarchist kids who smashed a few windows in and sprayed paint on walls. And guess what? The actual protest wasn't covered by the media at all, but the little anarchists going around being naughty, that was given major media coverage, and the general intention was to demean and bring into disrepute the idea that anyone should protest against cuts in health, cuts in education, or cuts in anything else. And so that was kind of a bit of a no-hoper, really. So you don't really make any difference with that kind of activity, I don't think, unless you're going to actually bring a government down. They do. So what is you go in the back door and you negotiate, and you just put the wooden box in front of the bonobos, and when they stop shagging each other through terror, they'll get used to it. And, you then become part of a system, recognised by a system, and then you go your own way.
But you're not controlled by the system. You're a king among kings then at that point.
That's right, absolutely. And then everyone in the court has the opportunity through education and liberation to find their own sovereignty and act freely according to their conscience.
That was Nicholas devere von Drakenberg. You can look him up on Facebook or follow the links at libertycappress.com. And that's it for this edition of The Invisible Hand. If you'd like to make a donation to ensure future episodes of this free